We begin, so we have plenty of time for our speaker today and for discussion afterwards. So it's my pleasure on behalf of the Berman Institute to introduce you to our colleague, Dr. Vina Vaswani.
Hello. Hello.
Vina has been with us now for about 7 weeks.
Yes.
Under Global Forum for Bioethics and Research Fellowship with support from the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and is doing an intense look at this topic of controlled human infection model studies and the ethical conduct of those types of studies, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that, and is seeking to develop a white paper to support policy and ethics guidance for India, a country where Vina lives and works. Vina is from Yenapoya University in Mangalore, India. She's the head of forensic medicine at the university and also the director of their ethics center, which is now a few years old. Vina has an interest in not only bioethics, she has a master's in bioethics, but has also studied quite a bit in the areas of obviously forensic medicine, but also in human rights, and has another interest in sort of, she's pursuing her PhD right now looking at this, issues around the treatment of bodies, around disasters,
Dead bodies.
Dead bodies, around and issues around ethics in treatment of human remains. So we're lucky to have Vina here. She's bringing, I think, quite a lot of experience and exploring this topic with Jeff and I and others here. So I'll hand it over to you, Vina.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
Greetings from Yenapoya, and I would like to, at the offset, start with my gratitude which I bring to Wellcome Trust for giving me the travel grant. It was a research fellowship for 2 months, and I was very lucky that they put me here because when they said Berman Institute of Bioethics, I was wondering, I don't know anybody there. Of course, I had met Joe in the conference in GFBR. I said, let's start from there, but it has turned out to be a great experience because when I go back, I'm taking a lot of friends with me and a lot of great ideas, and so I'm thankful to Berman Institute for that. And also the librarians who have helped me at different stages, especially with the collection of the review of literature, and also the experts who I have interviewed. I have interviewed ethicists and some researchers and IRB members, and it has been a great experience talking to them and trying to draw what are the commonalities with them and which I can transplant it in the Indian context. So this is roughly the roadmap that we're taking today. A small introduction to Mangalore. What's Mangalore like? What's the clinical trials like in India? And also CHIM studies, an overview, and CHIM studies in particular to Indian context. And the approach to white paper, we have followed the pragmatic approach because in 2 months we needed to get the issues and then try to look at it from the Indian context. And we have some preliminary results. And we'd also like your inputs and the critical analysis of the work that we are doing, and any input is welcome to you and the way forward from here. So a 1,000-mile journey begins with a step. So when I landed here on 10th of May, I was very happy to join the department on 11th, and there is India. And Yenapoya is located in the state of Karnataka. Many people think it is Bangalore, but I always say it is like Mangalore. So it is not Bangalore. And so this is a small district of Dakshin Kannada. And Yenapoya University, it's called deemed to be university because you would be thinking, what is a deemed university? So in Indian context, the government universities are called universities. The private, the semi-private, any other institutions, autonomous, they're called deemed to be university. They have the rank, but then there is always a kind of class hierarchy that the government is funded by government, so they are at a different class. And the private is on its own, so it is in a different, so to differentiate, this is the discriminatory, you could say, or a distinctive feature, I don't know, but it's called deemed to be university. So this is Yenapoya University, when you look at it, it's quite beautiful. It has a 33% green cover, a lot of coconut trees, palms, and we also have a medical, dental, physiotherapy, and nursing, and we have about 5,000 student population. We are a small university. We became university in 2008. So we've barely been there for 10 years now. This is Mangalore in short. So you see a lot of greenery, and also it's a huge place. It's 1,500 years old. It is a lot of temples, temple architecture. Why I'm also showing this is, you see, it is an area which is quite humid, lot of seas, rivers, coconut trees. So along with that comes certain endemic infections, like malaria, like filaria, which is quite rampant in that region, in the whole of Karnataka for that matter. This is some of our cultural activities that happen around the year. One is the buffalo race, and also this is called Yakshagana, the face mask, where a person is depicted by the emotions are depicted by the color one wears. Like when a person is in rage, it's a different color. Jealousy, different color. So it's a connotation of art form. It's very good in seafood. I would like to tell you that whenever you are in Bangalore, please come to Mangalore or anywhere in India, and I can promise you very good seafood. And lastly, what I want to show you is this picture where the dead are worshipped and they are recalled once a year through these dance forms, where people believe that the dead come back to bless them. So the city is quite a hub of institutions, yet the culture lives with it. Now coming to clinical trials in India. So whenever we talk of clinical trials, like it or not, the economy does come in. We cannot separate the economy from the trials. So now towards 2018, it's going to be nearly a $2 billion. India's share is 2% in the clinical trial market. What drives clinical trials in India? Why are they quite popular in India? Is because of our population. We account for nearly 20% of the world population, sorry, 16%, but we bear 20% of the world burden of diseases. So because of the burden as well as the population, and the different kinds of diseases from infectious to non-infectious and so on. And also there are a lot of investment by the pharma companies. A good infrastructure support is there. And what are the challenges that we face when it comes to challenges is the regulations keep changing. It's quite fluid, and one moment it is this and the very next moment the regulations have changed. So that does cause a bit of inconvenience to all the stakeholders in the clinical trials. There's a huge delay in the approvals. So it could take anything between 6 months to 9 months, because from the time it has to get approved from the central agency, it's a long time. There's a shortage of trained researchers as well as the ethics committee members. Whereas the strength lies in our IT support. We have a huge IT support, and actually India, you could say, is a country of paradoxes. We have a huge, rich millionaires as well as we have the biggest slums in Asia. So that is how, and also we have a treatment naive population. Huge amount of population does not access antibiotics, and some of them don't believe that antibiotics do you good. So then, any chemistry, new chemical entities are very good to be tested on them because they are already naive with the antibiotics. And the weakness is that, I should say it's a weakness because throughout the career in medicine, in a post-graduation, there are certain valued subjects which are not tested, which are not even talked about to the students. So one is professionalism. So this is assumed that the doctor becomes professional all by himself just because he has learned anatomy, physiology, biochemistry and clinical things. Similarly, documentation process is very, very haphazard. We have a little bit of adjusting attitude, which is a great positive thing when you have scarcity. But the same adjustment attitude does not help in all cases. So we have this attitude, doesn't matter, it just doesn't matter. So that is the reason why the documentation and adhering to process is not very, very meticulous. Each of us think there should be a lot of rules, but we think we are exception to the rule. Rule must be for the neighbor, not for me. So this, to some extent, And we also lack our undergrads, our postgrads lack training in ethics and research methodology. So research and ethics are two crucial areas for a good researcher, but with these training lacking, we feel there is a need for us to pull our socks in that. What is the regulatory framework like in India? We have a Drugs and Cosmetics Act, and that gives us different schedules. It gives the schedules for out-of-counter drugs, the drugs for cancer. Similarly, it puts all the clinical trials in the Schedule Y. Anybody wishing to do a clinical trial or knowing about clinical trial must read what is the Schedule Y, because it deals with the sponsors, the researchers, and the ethics committees. And for each of them, the specifications have been given, what should be their training, and so on. So all the clinical trials have to be registered with a central registry which is called the Clinical Trial Registry for India. That is www.ctri, that means Clinical Trial Registry.nic.in. If you go to this website, you can see all registered clinical trials that are happening as of now. Government has a huge control over how the clinical trials go on. And here the government is represented by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So you make an application to the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, which is called CDSCO, and they get a clearance from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare before a clinical trial begins. And then the drug controller, Governor of India, so General of India, DCGI, and later on they get a permission to start a clinical trial, which is not same as starting. Then they have to go to the ethics committees. So there is a nodal organization for research in India, and it's called the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR. The guidelines were only updated in 2017. It was like a national level workshop at 20 different settings. Everyone sent their comments. But again, there is not a word mentioned about the controlled human infection model. So again, as much as we have made it, we always find there is a gap between what is required to be done and what is already there. And also we have an audio-visual consent for certain clinical trials. But again, that has caused a lot of discontent among people because participants do not want to have an audio-visual recording of their consent. First of all, they would not even want to come on to be photographed and the video, and they're not even sure the the privacy would be maintained. So why all this took place was because of a wake-up call in 2013. From 2005 to 2012, in 7 years, the government of India put out a figure of 2,644 deaths due to clinical trials. Now, as soon as this came in, then the media went berserk. Then there was a lot of reactions from every stakeholder that this is not what we want. And the Supreme Court at that point said, let's ban all the clinical trials in India. So there were nearly 145 global clinical trials that were overnight stopped. Now, there was an inquiry which led to the formation of a committee, and they said all ethics committees have to be registered. Ethics committee members have to be trained. The researchers need to be accredited, and the laboratories also have to be accredited. So this was what was the output by the committee which recommended. And one of the important things that came out of the Supreme Court was that if a volunteer, a participant develops a complication, then the sponsors have to be responsible for the treatment. So that was missing so far. So now this is how the media started making a story that this is a human guinea pigs are being used. Time and again, there has been a trust deficit with health carer and the patient. But this also hammered home that the researchers and the participant, the gaps increased. Many times, a one-day newspaper can cost a huge trust deficit. It becomes difficult to regain it. I'm speaking from my personal experience as a forensic person. There was a disaster in Mangalore, air crash disaster. about 155 people had perished. And we did not have mortuary capability for 155 deaths. Each has got 12 or 18 bodies. So as a result, it so happened that we were asked to look after 25, 40 to 40 bodies where our capacity was 8. We were working only 20 hours a day with only 4 hours gap in between. But the media said we were not looking at the body in a nice way because we had exposed the body outside, we had not this, we had not given cold storage and so on and so on. So I want to tell you that when media represents us, we always wish that there should be both sides of the story and not only one side of the story. So this is what happens to the clinical trials. So then, what are CHIM studies?
Is it Vina?
Put the bag outside.
He doesn't want to dig in your bag. He's being very polite.
So,
We're trying to quarantine
it's
it.
a controlled human infection model. The CHIM study stands for Controlled Human Infection Model Studies, which involves intentional infection to a participant. A normal participant who is intentionally infected, and you see the immune response, and then you give a treatment, or you have a treatment plan already chalked out, or you could have a vaccine which you could develop. It depends on the objective of the CHIM study. So usually, what is used to infect is a parasitic agent or a virus which is grown in the laboratory conditions, which is controlled, the dose is controlled, and in a controlled atmosphere it's done. So that's also called the human challenge studies. Generally what happens in a recruitment for a clinical trial, that you talk to them and say we are trying this out. But in a CHIM study, you need to talk to the normal people and say we are going to infect you with an organism. You might have a disease, you might have depending on what is being injected, a diarrhea, you may have maybe a worm infestation, you may have fever, influenza, whatever, and then we will give you treatment and we will be observing you, but you need to be admitted during that time. Now this is where informed consent also would be very crucial, because how much does the person understand the progression of the disease, what you're trying to tell them. So one of the first challenge studies, they said, was by the Edward Jenner. When he tried to inject the cowpox vesicle, he removed the pus from the cowpox and he injected into Phelps. He was the milkmaid's son. He had noticed that the milkmaids did not get smallpox because they were cross-resistant because of the chickenpox immunity they had because they were milking the cows. So he wanted to do that as an experiment, which later on turned out to be quite good, and that is why the variola that he used later on became a vaccine. So why do people do CHIM studies? What is the role of CHIM studies? Because if we do not know the pathogenicity of an organism, if we would not know how does a person respond to this, and to understand the immune processes a person undergoes after being infected, and also to evaluate vaccines. Supposing we already have 4 vaccines available, but we find that this particular strain is not responding, so we might want to change and make a different vaccine, but before taking it to the population, where for the first time, you would like to see it in a small group of volunteers. So that is how the CHIM sometimes is very important, because it does reduce the time span for making a vaccine before you get into the public health consumption. But vaccine is not the only reason why CHIM studies are done. Now this is the model which is used to create CHIM. In the first instance, you will have to make the top chart shows how the candidate infecting agent is prepared. That means if I want to infect somebody with malarial sporozoite, it can be prepared in the lab. The dosage has to be refined. It has to be seen that an injection does not have more than 6 to 8 sporozoites, and that is under good laboratory condition, good manufacturing practice, and so on. So that is the first step of preparing that. Second is using the model on human volunteers. Now this human volunteers you approach, you have to tell them that we are going to first give you a vaccine, if I want to evaluate vaccine, and later on, I'm going to infect you with this to see whether your vaccine has been effective. So at the second level is where human participants come in. So what is control about the control human infection model? What are we controlling? We are controlling, that is, the control implies that we know something about the disease, we have quite extensive knowledge, but we have controlled the inoculum. We are not giving such an amount that it is toxic. We are giving an amount which is enough to cause immune response, enough to bring about onset of disease, but not enough to have a full-blown disease. And supposing this does happen, there is always a rescue treatment available. And in all the CHIM studies, the serious adverse events have not been reported. A couple of adverse events have been reported, the rescue treatments have been given, but as far as we have gone through the literature, they have not reported deaths due to CHIM model of vaccines. But it has to be done under good clinical practice. It has to be done under good manufacturing practice guidelines which are internationally accepted. And it should also have a good laboratory practice, which means we need to go to those labs which are accredited. Now when we talk of these things, it is very easy because in US, most of the labs are accredited. But when we talk of it in India, we need to know many are not accredited, but they would still be doing a study. So when it comes to white paper, we are trying to look at what are the reasons where we need to exercise caution and what are the methods by which caution can be exercised. And actually, whenever we are doing this, I think mentally we should think of an invisible boundary beyond which we should not go. Because too much adventure in an unknown area can be dangerous. This is a mythological story. It is from Ramayana, where Rama is the king and his wife is Sita. And Ram's brother is Lakshman. So these three of them, this whole context is in dense forest. They are roaming incognito. They are not recognized by anybody. And as even in those days in mythological stories, a lady is not left alone. She has to be guarded by a brother or a husband. So in this part of the story, Rama has gone to get some fruits and the brother is looking after her, but he hears his brother's voice. So he feels he should go and look after whether his brother is in danger. So he tells Sita, I am putting a spell around this house. That is your safety zone. The moment you cross it, the spell will not protect you. And I cannot protect you from the harm that comes to you. So please be within this. And as soon as he goes there, actually the voice he heard was only manipulated by this person, Ravana, who is one of the villains in the story. He is so much enamored by Sita that he wants to marry her, he wants to kidnap her. So he is waiting for an opportunity creating such scenario. So he comes as a mendicant, as a sage, asking for fruits, alms. So he's waiting outside. But as you see, she is not supposed to cross that. But slowly he steps behind and she goes there trying to give him. She does not remember that there is a danger line. And that is how he kidnaps her and takes her away. And the story takes a different turn with wars and so on. But idea is, I think I always look at what is our safety boundary here. What do we take it as a value beyond which we cannot go? What should we take it as limitations beyond which there is a slippery slope? So I think that requires either to look at it as a window of foreseeability or a kind of Lakshman Rekha. Rekha is a line, Lakshman was the person who made it. So we think that we should not cross that line. So we need to be aware of such dangers because you are infecting a very normal person. So what should be your area where you should be looking out for? So prospects of CHIM research in India, why do we need it? Do we need it first? Yes, we have a huge disease burden. We have our main problem is even for malaria, we are having resistance. So when I'm doing autopsy on an 8-year-old child who is resistant to malaria, it feels bad. it feels, okay, somewhere the health system has failed. So we would think, if there is a vaccine through CHIM, if there is an expedited way where it can be prevented, then we would save lives. So there is a disease burden. And also the cost of manufacturing these could be much lower, because the entire spectrum of clinical trial would take about minimum of 3 to 4 years, whereas this could be expedited to the extent that it could, by more than half, it could reduce the time gap. So that would really save on the costs. If it is done well, if there is a capacity building, there would also be infrastructure development, it would be locally relevant. But if the last one is, how are we doing these CHIM studies? Who are we taking into confidence when we want to plan our CHIM studies? Are we looking at the global model where CHIM studies are more popular, or are we looking at people from whom we should get the problem for which we have to give a solution? So this is our point of weakness, because we do not engage much with the communities. Because we feel that people come to us when they need us, and social scientists do a lot of research with people, but as far as hospitals are concerned, we still have to make sure that we first engage with people to see what are the disease burdens for which we need to look at the CHIM studies. So as a part of this Global Forum Bioethics Research Travel Fellowship, which I was to make a white paper under the mentorship of Joe and Jeff, for which I am here. So we went through a process. First we had a meeting to discuss in which way should be the approach. And so we decided that we should have all the stakeholders to reflect, debate, and contribute to the development of a robust regulatory mechanism. So for that, we started with reviewing the literature that was in the CHIM. And we also reviewed the existing guidelines. There weren't many. And we started teasing out the ethical issues. And we thought later on, when we have had a dissemination meeting, we shall present it as such to the Department of Science, Technology, and the Ministry of Health, and so on. So first we prepared a timeline, we carried a literature search, and we had inputs from key informants. We had a lot of researchers we talked to, ethics committee members, and bioethicists. And that was a very, very humbling experience for me. And we identified the key ethical issues and the frameworks. And we analyzed the issues into policies and guidelines, and now we are in the process of drafting. So the CHIM has been there since 70 years so far. It was not called CHIM, there are different names to it. So human challenge studies, non-therapeutic infection model studies, so non-purposeful infection studies, and these are the different names. So when you look for CHIM, it's possible we may not get these studies that were not with the CHIM. Right. So currently, 155 studies are registered worldwide, and less than 1% of all the clinical trials are CHIM studies. And this is the clinicaltrials.gov, and this for malaria, influenza, and respiratory syncytial virus. You can even see that it's for the common cold, even hookworm, like I think in Netherlands, where they had the volunteers who ingested a fluid with worms, or the eggs of the worms, so that they could track the infection, how the parasites travel in the body, and so on. So all these processes are happening. So these are the diseases for which it is reported. Now from our preliminary results, we had a lack of specific guidelines which addressed the CHIM studies in low-middle income countries. But we had a framework from Malawi. We also had an ethical consideration of Zika virus study, and we had a WHO expert committee, but that was on biological standardization and also for the vaccine. So there was one concern, ethical concern, it was not one, but similar ethical concern which was shared by ethics committee members, researchers, as well as bioethicists alike. They asked me, what is the kind of standard care in India? Is it available to everybody? If something goes wrong, would everybody be getting that kind of care? And secondly, they wanted to know the role of therapeutic misconception. Because in India, mostly the family physicians are also in the universities as professors, they also do the clinical trials. So how does a patient know that this is clinical trial and this is therapy. So they thought that there is more chance of a patient being misled when he enrolls into a clinical CHIM studies thinking it is therapy and not knowing, in spite of you telling, because they would believe that they would always do something good for us. And availability of what are the support services if something goes wrong, because this was the concern raised by everybody from the Indian context, and that I think would be very worthwhile looking into, that how are we supporting these concerns. Now, considering the existing trust deficit, one of the biggest thing we have is a community engagement and dialogue. We haven't done that so far, not much, not to a significant extent. And secondly, addressing the disease burden. Now, many a times we have had a lot of clinical trials going on, but not all of them meet the national demands for health. So are we looking at CHIM in that line, or are we looking at it, is it directly addressing the disease burden? And also we need to have where the strong justifiable study design, recruitment process and methodology is there. And the basic concern is the risk-benefit analysis. How do I talk of risk if I don't know the risk myself? Because this is uncertain agent. We are doing it for the first time. So how do we tell them that we don't know anything about it and yet think that they would believe there is nothing, or they would think that there is nothing, no cause for concern? Because the language as such is sometimes a double-edged sword. When you say, I don't know anything about it, they would think that there is nothing to report about it. Otherwise, he would have known if there was something. They would have cautioned us if there was. So this is some gray area we need to look at. And the strengthening of the inclusion-exclusion criteria, because if we are looking at participants, who are going to be our participants? Generally, in clinical trials, although it is not official, we take people as they come to the hospital. We don't have a transparent recruitment mechanism. So would that mean that we are taking some way or the other patients in the CHIM studies? And how do we make our informed consent robust? Because if we do not tell patients that this is what it stands for, or if we tell but they don't understand, then how is that understanding by them? So if there is a process we can assess their comprehension, it would be nice. Because without understanding they are into CHIM and something goes wrong, it would not be good. Because we would be failing them because we are not transparent in that aspect. And to balance fair compensation for time lost. Now this is again a sword of Damocles. You give them compensation, you give a suitable compensation, then the question of exploitation of the programs. Because some people who don't have job, they're jobless, they would like to register for it. And you want to avoid that and don't give them compensation, it would still be exploiting them. Because they have to spend a lot, they have to give up their daily wages when they come for the trial. So what is that golden mean which should be justice to them, at the same time we are not exploiting them or enticing them to enter into the clinical trial. And a fairness in recruitment and selection process, and lastly the safety monitoring once they are into the trial. Because in India, it's difficult for follow-up if they come from different villages. And then, if you lose them for follow-up, they're still in a phase where they can infect or their immunity is suppressed. Then it could be that we are causing harm to them. So then, also the issue of capacity building, infrastructure development, and so on. So these were some of the ethical issues, but mainly concerns are in the literature and also in the interview regarding risk-benefit and informed consent, subject selection, and community engagement. They tend to come out in a very strong way that how is India going to handle these issues. So now from what we have done so far is we need to still have additional key informant interviews in India. Here also my interview still, I have still 2 more interviews to go tomorrow. So it's an ongoing process, interviews are not yet over. And after I go to India, I also interview some people. Then we're going to have a complete analysis. Then we'd like to have a white paper drafted, and we'd like to have it as a kind of dissemination meeting. We put it before the stakeholders, and also developing the publishable papers and so on. So but a part of this is also awareness program, because you've already addressed ethics committee members, and then you will be addressing the research scientists and others. So I would like to tell you at the end of this that we would say these are some of the things that I brought before you, but is there something that we should have seen which we have not seen? Or is there anything that you could like to give us as inputs which we can take? Or is there something that would help us look at it in a different light? So this is where we stand today. That's with the help of Jeff and Joe, and we have been able to cover this. And I thank you for the opportunity. Susan, thank you for arranging this.
Great, thanks, Vina, for sharing your work in progress. We do have quite a bit. We have maybe 15-20 minutes for questions, so just maybe go around the room here. Start. Yeah.
I had a whole list of questions, but
Yeah.
when you talked about the recruiting, you're talking about the people who are arriving at the hospital, so that would imply that they have some morbidity at the beginning. And I'm wondering why you would choose people who have a health issue that could be a confounder instead of you choosing healthy volunteers.
Thank you very much. It's a very important question. In India, a patient is always accompanied by relatives. He cannot come alone. So it's always the relatives that are asked for. So they may not have a disease process, but at the same time, because they have come there, you are asking them to be a part of your trial.
So you're asking the relative to be your volunteer.
But that still would
That's
not
kind
mean
of-
it's a fair selection.
It's not a
there could be-
guarantee, no.
No, and it could be, they would feel the force because somebody is being treated, so they might not be able to say no. So there's a kind of coercion they might feel by asking the relatives. I totally agree.
Have you considered utilizing the existing public health facilities
Yes.
for patients who are from villages?
From?
People coming from villages,
Yeah.
most of them have now some kind of a public health now. So
Yes. Actually, we have, even the private hospitals, they all cater to the government schemes as far as patients are concerned. No patient is tailed away. And the public health, as such, you mean the facilities, meaning the PHCs?
Yeah.
Public, yeah. But the research usually may not happen there. Because like with this report, which was for the Supreme Court, which was given by Chaudhary, that they have to be accredited hospitals and labs. So the public health unit, PHU, or a PHC public health center may not have the facility. So in that case, those generation of people will not be, a group of people may not even be able to get into the trial.
not conducting the research, but spreading the word and supporting.
Yeah. Actually, that is one of the our nodal points of contacts, because every medical college has 15 to 20 PHCs under them. So if we have to do for participation, we need to go there. But at the same time, the languages are so different. Like in Mangalore itself, there are 5 languages that go on. So I know 3 of them, but yet 2, if they come, then I would feel a little difficult. Of course, we deal with dead because I'm a forensic person, but we also do clinical forensics, like sexual assault, injury, and other cases. So we need to know what they mean, is what we have understood, and so on. Yes, Gail.
Yeah, I just wanted to, so I think part of what he was saying was that you may not do the research there, but they might be a place to do the recruitment. Again, sort of barring the logistics of getting a person actually to the facility. The question I wanted to ask, first I wanted to apologize for coming in late, and maybe you already talked about this, but I was intrigued by your parable about the line, and I'm wondering if part of what you spoke about maybe before I got here was the line around which organisms, right? I guess to say something like, malaria, which is a disease if caught early is relatively quote unquote easy to treat versus HIV or something, right? That you're drawing a boundary around that. It may change over time, but that's another type of boundary that you're drawing around the space.
Yeah, actually the boundary represents for, I think, in every field, including the organisms, like what can we take as a CHIM study in India? If we do not have information on the available treatment, then we should not even be thinking about it to study the disease process. Because that's exactly what we had in mind. Because if there's already a treatment like malaria, then you could try it. But for those where there is no treatment existing, then we should not be trying it. Even though you would say it's a small dose so that it may not cause a disease, but there's a likelihood if it does cause, then we are not able to treat it.
And is that part of your white paper process?
Yes, yeah, because only we were thinking of the disease burden which it directly addresses and which has a treatment, a rescue treatment if something goes wrong. Thank you.
This is a little bit of a follow-up to this. So there will be a section in your white paper that's sort of criteria, moral justification for doing CHIM studies in the first place. That would include, you know, is it an endemic disease? You know, is it a disease that is important enough to study, and versus other diseases?
Just
So
make a note of it once. Yeah.
This is actually really interesting, Vina. I have one observation and a question. So my observation is, and maybe, I don't know, Beryl and Jeremy, other people can answer this question. You said that there were 80 trial-related deaths in 7 years, which doesn't strike me as terribly high.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know how many trial deaths there are in the U.S. for trial-related deaths there are in the U.S., but I bet there are more than that, or at least that many. It just doesn't seem that high.
Well, we don't keep track in a systematic way, but I would be very surprised if it was anywhere close to that.
Really? Over 7 years?
Yeah.
10?
I mean, here, what's
Related
the
to the
thing to
clinical
experience
trial
here at
and
Hopkins,
not
Dale?
the disease.
Remember when we had that here, they shut
Over
everything
20
down.
or 25 years, we may have had, with thousands of trials, we may have had 1 or 2
Yeah.
trial-related deaths, that's all.
And
That's
actually
major,
one of the reasons was of these, they were tribal schoolgirls.
Okay, but I'm still making, so I don't mean to minimize
Yeah,
the
no, I know,
gravity of
exactly.
having any trial-related
Yeah.
deaths. But I am saying that, you know, that there's an unfortunate role that the media plays.
Yes,
in this.
absolutely. Because I was quite impressed when you were teaching us about this in the global bioethics program. Because this is exactly what happens. Because the science could be going one step forward, but it's pulled 5 steps backward. But we are also with people. But all we were trying to tell is, why don't we wait till the investigation is clear, till the government puts its reports out. But before that, the media makes such a mess that many of the clinical trials, which were straightforward, even observational studies, people started saying, no, we are not a part of it, we want to take it. So sometimes it can be very detrimental.
My question actually had to do with the use of the term vulnerability. So you said in one of your earlier slides that there's an exception for vulnerable populations like HIV and leprosy.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of work being done here about sort of what makes research participants vulnerable, and is vulnerability even the right concept? So can you say a little bit more about how vulnerability is thought about in India and why those populations would be considered vulnerable? And
This was only in relation to the audio-visual recording of the consent.
oh,
Because when the Supreme Court gave a judgment, then there was a representation by the people, for especially HIV, leprosy, where they are stigmatized. So do not subject them to audio-visual, because even the support people in the research may not treat them well.
had to do with that, identifying.
That was to
them.
do with, to identify them. So that was only regarding.
In looking at research trials in India, has there been a difference in the approach to looking at trials, comparing those that originate with Indian agencies versus outside agencies such as the NIH or agencies in the US?
Okay. So the track that it has to follow is same. It has to go through the Ministry of Home Affairs and it is CDSU, DCGI, then come to local ethics committees. Sometimes there could be some questions raised by the local ethics committees because although the protocol is fine, but in the local context, it may not be going down well with the local people. So in that case, there may be some questions. But as far as the trials are concerned, I think the ethics committee does not differentiate.
They said several years ago, because of research-related deaths, all research activity was halted.
150
Did that include research sponsored by agencies such as the NIH or?
Global agency, global research agency.
Everything.
Global clinical trials of I think 144 or 152, they were stopped. And that's for 2 years. Later on, then they had a process by which the committee submitted report that there should be accreditation and training of the ethics committees.
Are children included in these studies?
Uh,
Are children included in these studies, and if so, how do you think of them differently?
Yeah, actually, we have this guidelines document with the Indian Council of Medical Research that if the children are included as a part of this, then we take assent up to age of 12 years. 12 to 18, then we also ask them whether they're willing to sign, but the parents' consent is also taken till they are 18 years.
But for CHIM, there aren't guidelines currently
For
for
the
CHIM.
CHIM, so far no guidelines are in there, no, it's as and when it's made. Because
That's
CHIM
what I was
study would be
thinking.
very difficult. If you are looking at pediatric population, it has to be exceptional that disease is seen only in pediatric population. Only for that a person is enrolling in CHIM would be to some extent justifiable than for any other disease CHIM. So there should be guards in place so that the guidelines in place so children are not entered into CHIM, which is not, doesn't benefit children in the end.
Because I would think there would be some like diarrheal illnesses or other diseases that do have a different pathogenic process in children and why children are more impacted than adults, so that they're actually would.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems it would be a hard thing
It's
to talk
possible,
about with
it's
the rest of
possible.
it, but are you missing them out?
But I think there would be a safety cover of a CHIM in adult first before you try in children.
Mhm.
So then only, yes.
I missed something in the beginning, I hope you can clarify for me. So if there is a rescue treatment, otherwise you wouldn't do it, okay. But if there's a rescue treatment, why do it anyway? In other words, what,
Yes.
there's a
absolutely.
missing link there, what are
Yes.
you actually trying to
Yes.
determine?
The rescue treatment could be in the form of a medicine, but at the same time you cannot put it as a national guideline because of the prohibitory cost. So now supposing malaria, which is a huge problem, there's another disease. Right now we are having even scrub typhus as a problem. So when these diseases are coming, the treatment available is only in few centers and it's expensive. And there's also a type of possibility that you cannot use it as a public health measure. So then you're always in the lookout. It's preventing is better. Here in the rescue treatment, you're giving treatment. But for the population, why we're studying CHIM is to prevent this through vaccines, if you can.
Okay, so you're actually, okay, I see what you're trying to do.
The longer, because you
Some of
take
these
a broader picture, yeah.
Mm.
I have a general question. Are there any similar studies happening in rest of the world?
Yes,
Any
there
other places are doing CHIM-like studies?
yeah, they're done in more than about 35-40 countries. 155 CHIM trials are going on right now. In Asian countries, I think only Thailand is doing.
Where is it?
Thailand,
Thailand.
Bangkok, yeah. Chulalongkorn University.
This is all for vaccine for okay, gotcha.
Hi, I'm Terry Shapiro. I don't know anybody here, but I came because I saw your announcement, and I'm a professor in the Division of Clinical Pharmacology,
Okay.
and I've done malaria challenge studies in healthy volunteers here at Hopkins. So many of the things that you said resonate very deeply, but to me, the pivotal point is the informed consent.
Yeah.
And in addition to being freely given, so not, we don't ever approach people and ask. We put up ads and ask them to reply to us. There's never any issue of possible coercion.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if taking the family of patients might have some element of coercion to it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely.
But more difficult is the informed part. And in a malaria challenge study where people can develop malaria, you really have to be sure that they are informed. And we gave them lectures. They came to lectures to learn about malaria, and they had to take a quiz. And they had to get 80% or better on the quiz, or they couldn't enroll in the study. And I had one of my study nurses fail the quiz. It was not an easy quiz. So, you know, really, if you were sort of casting about for issues about how to get it informed. And to me, unless you can have that person tell you about the study satisfactorily, you can't ever know that it's informed. And the other aspect that you touched on about coercion was the reimbursement, which is indeed a double-edged situation. And we have a policy in the unit of just a schedule of reimbursement things. You come to the clinic, you get this much. You have a blood stick, you get that much. And we just totaled them all up. And everybody going into the study was offered the same reimbursement. At the end of this, there were multiple, we've done this several times, but at the end of one of the studies, we had a very pleasant and unexpected surprise of a party given by the volunteers to the staff. They had a cake with a malaria mosquito on it, sorts of things. And the thing that struck me, these studies were 4 placebo, guaranteed to get malaria, and 12 interventions, which happened to be, I'm in pharmacology, so there were drugs. And the subjects who thought they got the best part of the deal, all were compensated the same. The ones who thought they got the best deal were the ones who got malaria. Why? Because they didn't have to keep coming to the clinic and getting stuck and having to, take the bus in the mornings, so it was quite surprising. And to me, it said that it worked. To me, it said the compensation was right.
I guess it's a very important thing for us to use this as a method to see the comprehension, what they need.
The quiz is incredibly important. And I eliminated people who didn't pass. I couldn't eliminate my nurse. She had to come to a couple more times. The fun thing is, I don't think we realize it here particularly, but when you talk about complications and how is somebody taken care of with complications, we do studies here supported by NIH, supported by the pharmaceutical companies, supported by foundations. Who doesn't take care of people when they have a complication? NIH. There is no built-in compensation if you're in an NIH-supported trial, if you have a complication. And Hopkins has had to pick up the tab on that in the minutes. And it's a very little known fact, but it's true. And that is by far the largest sponsor of our clinical trials, NIH. So, sort of just know that when you call for that to be done, it's not standard practice here.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of sets of questions. So the first goes to a couple of the empirical claims you made, and you mentioned at first with the new approach to audiovisual consent that was required by the courts, that people were hesitant to use it and that there were some adverse events. Has anybody documented that resistance and problems with implementation? Because that would be a fascinating set of data to be responsive to the court. So rather than anecdotal work, even if it's anecdotal, at least to start, to begin a conversation so that there are database complaints about the law rather than just hunches. And the related one is you made some empirical claims about how telling people about certain interventions in certain ways would result in certain misunderstandings. And sometimes they can be lumped into things called therapeutic misconception, which I don't think is the right terminology for this for a variety of reasons. But assumptions about not knowing risk, the risk would translate to the individual as there are no risks. Has that been also documented, or is that a hunch? Because those are the things that could help drive an appropriate approach.
We have an Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, which is it's every quarterly, and they had conducted a survey on the people why they did not want to be in the clinical trial, and especially when it was audiovisual, and they felt threatened that their pictures are taken and God knows who it will be distributed to. So that was based on that particular study. And the second one you asked me was regarding the language. Now some of this has been in the hospital setting when we have interviewed the patients, and some of the publications, not on this particular context, but where the words have a different meaning. When you say about one particular word in a language, I don't know, and then a person thinks that it is not known. So it's not known to happen, is what you say, I don't know. So that was in a different language, it can be interpreted. So that was from a publication as well.
Yeah, so one of the tools that we've used in other studies that pose substantial risk, and I don't think there's anything that I've heard that differentiates the problems in consent for CHIM studies for any other kind of complex first-in-human or dangerous research, and those seem to be similar, is to use formative research to develop an informed consent process that goes to our intuitions. It's too bad Holly left the room, because we've done this in a range of different studies where you actually develop empirically an approach to ensuring understanding. IRBs around the world provide quizzes, but no one assesses which are the right questions to ask as a normative matter, but also how best to overcome these communication issues. So there are tools you can bring to bear that you might want to look into. The other question I had was, other than the challenges, most of the challenges you faced seem to be challenges inherent to risky research in general, and nothing unique to CHIM studies. But the ones that seem unique to CHIM studies are the design issues. So these really unique questions you had about not only how you control whatever you're infecting people with, the dose, the assumptions about dose, the lines, those ethical issues in design are really intriguing, and those seem unique to CHIM studies. The rest, all the problems of vulnerability, compensation, understanding, consent, subject selection, community engagements are research writ large. And I wonder to what extent it would be useful to have a document that actually focuses on the issues that are unique rather than trying to take on all of research ethics.
Yeah, that's to a great extent right, but the harm to the third parties is something that is not done with other studies. So here you are causing a harm, and if it's infecting the communities, and he doesn't want to be a part of the process.
So so you can put that in there. That's actually done in all sorts of HIV prevention trials and other infectious diseases, not terribly unique.
Giving someone a disease is not done in all dangers.
What's that?
Giving someone a disease.
Right, that's the part, yeah. But that's what I'm saying, was the document would do really good work to focus on the design issues, right? And those risk issues, rather than being distracted by the range of other issues that are inherent to global health research globally. It's a helpful suggestion, because otherwise, what happens is if you came up with your set, and you get wide stakeholder engagement, or whatever process you do, and then there's something unique, there's an exceptionalism to CHIM studies over issues that are relevant to all other sides of research. What you would have is a proliferation of guidelines for each kind of research that are taking place in the same setting. It might be a way to get one.
So, like you would suggest that we should concentrate more on the design issues so that make it robust, and also the risk issues that are,
Well, you're trying to minimize risk and maximize scientific benefit by designing a CHIM study, right? So you want to justify that. And so I would think about what are the things you could do to minimize risks and maximize the potential scientific benefits. And those raise some really interesting normative questions. Things about your claim about whether there's an existing treatment for a disease or whether that's supported. That's a useful criteria. A new disease versus an established disease. So if you did a CHIM study in Zika, versus you have to do a CHIM study in HIV versus a CHIM study in influenza, those are all very different, categorically different things, and those change the ethical calculus.
There is an FDA guidance on malaria, human malaria challenge studies. So it has been considered.
for malaria it's there, yes.
I didn't see it.
That is the WHO guideline.
No, FDA.
FDA.
FDA has
Okay.
a draft guidance for causal prophylaxis challenge studies.
So do we know if the type of recruitment that's done in India has an effect on the risk on third parties, because it is family members of other patient who has already health problems and who could be at greater risk of being infected, versus, let's say, other countries that conduct the same kind of studies but recruit subjects differently?
Yeah. I think, I can only give you a hypothetical, what I feel about it, that it's better when we take it from the community, from a sample, broader sample size, our chance of recruitment and the impact of the study will be much better, because otherwise the relatives are coming, and plus they may feel the coercion. So, and plus maybe they have come for a checkup, which is maybe eye or some other thing. So we really cannot rule out the comorbid conditions. So, but I still think that yes, like you said, we should be, as a part of the protocol, we should spell out how we are going to recruit. Because many a times it's not in the protocol, like in many of the clinical trials, that so many people will be in the study. So it's not whether you are recruiting through advertisement or in the newspaper or giving a flyer. So I think that also needs, if we can look at the process in which, so the transparency can be built around it, if the recruitment can be announced beforehand.
And so I have another question about stakeholders. So you said that there's a lack of engagement of stakeholders and in general. So who are the stakeholders that you have identified to be engaged by your study?
Okay. Actually, we have put the stakeholders into starting right from community, because we have a good number of communities which we are dealing with. We have my earlier studies in a primitive travel group, which was about the accessing of the healthcare and so on. So initially, because we go and recruit would be a wrong thing, but at least have we built trust with them? Have we talked to them about general stuff? And so we would start those communities. And otherwise, when it comes to CHIM studies, we have already talked to the ethics committee members. We need to talk to the researchers as well, and some bioethicists. But each of them will also give us inputs as to how to further take it on when we submit it before the government, like a policy paper. Or we would like it, they could come down and have a discussion. They would put what they requires to be built so that it's acceptable by them. So, but the people's engagement is certainly important, and many a times it cannot be done in the hospitals. We need to go there to do it. So.
I think we're actually out of time. Maybe we can take any other questions following. But let's thank Vina again for